So a question I get asked a lot when it comes to the YouTube videos that I create on this channel is, what gear do I actually use and how do I set up my shot? Well, today I'm going to break down everything that goes into me making a YouTube video, ranging from the gear that I use, the set design that I decided to go with, all the way down to color grading. So I've been making YouTube videos in this same room for about 2 years and the set has changed continuously. This is a small room, I think it's about 20 feet by 10 feet, so it's plenty of space, but this is actually a room in the basement of our church and we use it for all of our media content and I'm able to use it for my own stuff. Now I will be making a full YouTube studio tour whenever I hit 10k subs, at which point I'm going to be giving away a ZV-E10 Mark II or a ZV-E10, whichever one you want. So if you're interested in that, do hit the subscribe button. But this is the kind of main shot that I'm going to be settling into. I think it's one of my favorite ones. It's simple, but nice looking. Now the main camera that I've been using for all of my YouTube videos recently, unless I'm talking about that camera in particular, is the Sony FX30. I really do plan on picking up a second one of these because I absolutely love this camera and I kind of hate that whenever I'm talking about the camera that I can't be using it. So the plan is to pick up a second one. That's how much I enjoy it, just so that I'm able to actually use the FX30 while talking about the FX30. It kind of just does everything that I need it to do for my YouTube shots. Now on the camera body itself, I use one of two lenses depending on the kind of style of the shot that I want. And that's this one that you're watching right now, the Sirui 16mm f1.2. I used to use the Sigma 14mm, but recently Sirui reached out and offered to send me this, let me test it out, and I've really been enjoying it for YouTube videos. And so far I really like it. I think it has a really pleasing image, it's decently sharp, but it has a good amount of background blur, obviously being at f1.2. The only thing that I found is every so often it'll do a little bit of hunting. It's very infrequent, it's maybe once every 5 to 10 minutes of recording it'll do a little bit of pulsating, which hopefully can be fixed in a firmware update. I haven't checked to see if there's an update yet, so I'll have a lot more information on that on the full review, which is going to be coming out in a couple of weeks. But I think it's a great lens. Sirui 16mm f1.2, great, small, easy to use, and very affordable as well for a lot of people. 16mm on a APS-C camera gives you about a 24mm field of view, which I think is very pleasing. I think when you go much wider than maybe 20mm, you get into sort of too much distortion for my liking. I prefer this as a much more natural kind of look to the shot. The other lens that I like to use is the Sony 20mm f1.8 G lens. Now that's actually a full frame lens, which I used to use on my A7C, but I still use it sometimes on my FX30. Now obviously it's a bit more cropped in than the 16mm when using on an APS-C, but what I found with that lens in particular is that the background blur, even though it's not quite as technically as blurry as an f1.2 as it is f1.8, the background blur is very pleasing. It's very soft and very fluffy. There's not a lot of busyness. Not all lenses are equal. For example, this lens here, the background does get blurrier, especially if I hold something up to the lens. You can get a very nice blurry background. But the blur is just a little bit busier than you get with the Sony 20mm, which is much softer. Also, with it being a bit more zoomed in, it means that I can, be a little bit more intimate with the camera if I'm just wanting to have a bit of a rant or talk about a subject rather than talking about products. I prefer that slightly more zoomed in look. Now, on the Sony FX30, I'm using the XLR handle, which is running into my Sennheiser MKH416. This is a complete overkill mic. This is an $800 to $1,000 microphone, but I just love it. I love the way that it sounds on my voice. I think it's super clean, super crisp. I've got quite a heavy voice. It's quite a muddy kind of sound to my voice, so I like to use the Shure SM7Bs, but I find in my voice it just becomes too muddy, whereas this mic is just very pleasing. Now if I'm not using the FX30 or if I'm not in the studio, I use these are the little Hollyland Lark M2s, really simple little kit of microphones, super small, super convenient. I'm not going to get into that because I've got a full video on those. If you want to check that out, you can check the video out here, but great little microphones, and they work really well for what they do. So that's the camera body itself, right? I've got the small rig cage on there, not super interesting, but that just helps me mount it to the system that I'm using, which I'm going to get into in a second. But yeah, Sony FX30, 16mm or 20mm, depending on the kind of video that I want to use, with the XLR handle running directly into the Sennheiser MKH416. I think it's just a really nice, easy combo. I used to record this audio using this microphone running into a PodTrack P8, which is a beast of an audio system, and but it would record to a separate SD card, and then I'd have to sync those up in post, all that kind of stuff. At that point, I was like, I'm just going to try the XLR handle because I didn't have it originally. Picked one up, absolutely love it, and it just makes everything so easy. Now, the camera itself is actually mounted on a C-stand. It's basically just a little arm that can extend and move around to wherever I want it to be. It is by Neewer. it's a great little system. I basically screwed it on to a SmallRig super clamp at the end and clamped that on to my C-stand. Now the C-stand itself is on wheels. Everything in this room that I use personally for my YouTube videos are on wheels. This table is on wheels. It just makes everything so much simpler because currently all of this stuff is literally sitting right in the middle of the room. But this room is multi-purpose, so it's nice to be able to just wheel it out of the way and set it to the side. That way it's not going to be a bother for anybody else if they come in and need to record a video for something else. Now C-stands are one of those things that are just so handy to use. You can mount loads of things to them. You can stick sandbags on the bottom if you have a lot of weight distribution problems. Everything is attached to this one C-stand, which I can wheel around the room. Now the main light that I'm using is actually by Zhiyun. It's their Molus 60X, I think it's called. It's this teeny little light. I've made a video about this. You can check out the full review. And in that review, I basically said that like the small softbox that comes with it is pointless. If you're wanting to use it as a key light, you need to buy the Bowens adapter. And I thought, why don't I just do that? I should give it a go. Zhiyun didn't send me one, but I bought one myself. And then I mounted that to the C-stand using another super clamp with a little baby pin adapter. So that basically allows it to attach to the C-stand. And then I added a very large softbox. I think this is like a 120 softbox. It's huge, right? It's complete overkill, but it holds, which is very impressive for that small little mount. But the reason that I like to use that light is because you can power it multiple ways. It can be powered over USB-C, which I would do sometimes. We're going to talk about more about that in a second. And it can be powered by the mains. So currently I just have the mains plugged right into the stand, and the cable is long enough. It's got a really nice long cable that I can wheel it around this whole room kind of wherever I need it to go. So that's pretty handy. And these super clamps that I'm using, I think I'm using 2 or 3 of them in this whole build, are just so handy. I definitely recommend picking up a couple of those. Once you start getting into like gaffer equipment, which is basically like, rigging equipment for studio work or for, large sets, it's kind of addictive. So just be careful because you can really get into a big world of stuff. But C-stands, clamps, and wheels, I think are my favorite things. So that's the camera gear that I use. Now, there's a lot more that goes into making a nice YouTube shot. One of the most important things is not just your key light, but it's all of your accent lighting. For example, in this shot alone, even though I have a key light, I'm actually using 4 other lights just for this shot to make it look kind of nice. First off, I'm using 2 Pavo tubes, just their budget versions, the T78X, T87X, whatever it's called. I bought a pack of 4 of those and I'm just using 2 of them. So that is this tube light right here, which basically acts as my monitor light, which is very handy. And then I also have one just out frame over here, which is set to a cooler tone, lighting up the background and giving me a little bit of a hair light along here, which is very pleasing. Accent lighting is really, really important. For example, if I turn all of these off right now, you can see all of a sudden that this shot no longer looks anywhere near as interesting as it did before. So I've added a few lights around the room just to kind of add a little bit of something to the shot. Firstly, we have the Pavo tubes, and that is this one here, and then there's one out of frame over here, which just gives me a little bit of a hair light, but also just, this one especially is just a little bit of something interesting. It's got a little bit of a leading line to it, but they're nice and soft, easy to use, very cheap. You can get 4 for $400, or $100 a piece, but you can get a case if you buy the 4-pack, which is what I did, and I absolutely love those lights. You can attach them anywhere. You can power them over USB-C. They also have built-in batteries. All this stuff, they're great. Secondly, we have a little bit of color. So what I wanted to add back here was a light blue color just splashed on the wall. So just out of frame, right above my head here, on the very back corner, I have an LED panel by GVM. It's a pretty cheap little panel that I have set to a light blue color. Now that's not doing a whole lot, it's just adding literally a tiny bit of light blue to the room. Brings up the ambient light of the room as well, just makes everything a little bit more even. And then the last couple of lights are just sort of very much accent lights. So first off, I have this little bulb right here. It's just a large Edison bulb that I found on Amazon that doesn't have a problem with flickering, which you can run into, but I'll link that one down below. And it's a cool looking light. It just adds a little bit of something interesting to the shot, a little bit of warmth to the background. And then the last thing I use is a Amaran 60X with a snoot on it. Now, if you've never heard of a snoot before, it's basically this attachment that you add to the front of your light, turns it into like a spotlight. But you can add in little sort of frames into it that can give you different effects, which projects something onto the wall. Now, I've chosen to go with a window light for this one, but you could use anything. Now, I personally like having the window light here. It just kind of makes that wall a little bit more interesting over on the side there and makes it look like I'm in a room with natural light when I'm not. There's not a single window in this room, which is really nice for me. It helps me control the lighting. And then the last couple of little details in this room that I just think have worked well for this shot in particular is having a sort of bright colored accent couch here, this little bright yellow couch against the navy wall. Pops quite a bit. It's just a little bit something interesting. And then the last thing is obviously just my monitor, having my computer on with a nice colored backdrop, which is very simple, but just adds a little something to the background as well. And the last thing is this table. So this is a work in progress. Currently, this is just a piece of butcher block, a very small piece of butcher block that is completely unfinished, bolted down to a couple of like legs with wheels on it so I can wheel this around the room. I am going to finish this. I'm actually going to turn it into what will look like a concrete desk. Just you can fake a concrete desk pretty easily. If you're interested in seeing how to do that, I'll make a video and you can check that out. Let me know in the comments below. But having a desk is really nice. I don't always use the desk or a table in front of me, but sometimes if I'm talking about products, for example, if I'm talking about a camera, it's nice to be able to just set it in front of me rather than have to hold it the entire time. Or especially for building cinema rigs, it's nice to have the table in front of you. It's not necessary. For example, I could wheel this out of the way and, I could talk to you guys just like this, and this is totally fine, but a lot of times I want to have the table in here. So that's all of the equipment and everything that goes into this shot in particular. Now you'll notice I spent a lot more time talking about the backdrop and everything that goes into the accent stuff of this room rather than just the camera equipment, and that's because actually the shot that you're capturing is not just you, it's not just your camera and it's not just your lens. There's a whole lot more that goes into capturing a good image. You want to have a nice pleasing backdrop. They're easy to make, just, for example, this accent wall here, this sort of slat wall is something I built out of OSB and 1x4s from Lowe's. Just went to the hardware store, grabbed a bunch of wood and put it together. Pretty simple, painted over it, and it just adds a bit of texture to the back wall. Also works pretty well for acoustic treatment. Not amazingly, but it does a little bit of something. But it's important to put a lot of thought into the backdrop and into the actual set design of your shot. If you just shoot against a plain wall, especially if it's like a skin colored wall, you're just going to get lost in the image. Whereas if you put a bit more thought into the colors and the tones and the texture of your background, you can make yourself pop and stand out a whole lot more. All right, lastly, let's just talk about color grading. So I personally use Premiere Pro. I realize that most people don't use Premiere Pro anymore, but I'm just used to it. I know how to use it and I'm very quick with it, so it just makes it easier for me. So I use Premiere Pro, and in color grading, I'm currently filming in S-Log 3. I can just add a bunch of contrast and saturation to bring it back to what is a normal looking shot. What you're seeing right now is probably what this shot would normally look like to the naked eye. Now, there's a little trick that I like to use to just make me pop a little bit more, which is basically to add a little bit of warmth to my skin, because I'm quite a pale individual, as I'm Irish, and that we don't have the sun over there. So, adding a little bit of warmth to my skin, but also doing the flip side of that. So I'll go to my HSL tab and I'll select my skin color so that I've isolated just my skin. And then what I can do is I can flip that. So now I've only selected everything else. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push a little bit of blue into the background. And what that means is that, or just a little bit of color science, is that I then pop more from the background because there's not really any blues in my skin. It's made up of greens and oranges and yellows, stuff like that, which is the opposite of blue. So that just makes me pop a little bit more, and I just think it works pretty well. It's very simple to do. I don't know how to do it in all of the other editing softwares, but it should be pretty simple, that you should be able to just push colors around a little bit. In Premiere Pro, HSL tab, select the color that you want, hit the negative option here, and then you can change the background, push a little blue into there, and you're good to go. So that's everything that I use to make my YouTube videos. I hope that's been helpful to you. If it has, hit the like button, drop a comment down below, or maybe even subscribe as we continue to build this channel. I appreciate all of you for doing so, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.